Asha Degree.
Asha Degree.
Asha Degree. She was last seen walking along Highway 18.
Today, we are talking about Asha Degree, a shy 9-year-old girl from North Carolina who went missing on Valentine's Day in 2000. How it happened is very mysterious, but the why it happened is even more so.
For more than 2 decades, police have hunted for clues, unable to identify a single suspect, until fresh eyes and new technology led to a startling discovery in 2024 that just might solve this cold case for good and finally bring
9-year-old Asha Degree went missing 23 years ago. She was last seen February 14th of 2000. 23 years later, Cleveland County Sheriff's Department said that they will not stop until they locate Asha. Over the years, they have conducted hundreds of interviews in connection with Asha's case and have followed hundreds of leads. Investigators said that Asha disappeared from her bedroom at some point on February 14th between 2:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. There were no signs of forced entry and there wasn't a scent that the dogs could pick up on. They figured though that she was last seen walking along Highway 18 because 2 different people reported that they saw her while they were driving along the highway at 4 o'clock in the morning.
What happened to 9-year-old Asha Degree on a cold February night in 2000 is not just a missing child case. It is one of the most disturbing mysteries in American history. Because within a single night, a normal family routine turned into a nightmare that has lasted more than 2 decades. And the most terrifying part is this. Asha was last seen walking alone on a dark highway at 4 a.m., and no one knows why. That morning, everything looked ordinary. A church visit, a family lunch, a normal evening at home. Nothing suggested danger, nothing suggested escape, and nothing suggested a child would leave her bed in the middle of the night. But what happened after midnight changed everything. Because sometime between 3:30 and 4:15 a.m., multiple drivers reported something shocking. A small child walking alone on Highway 18 in complete darkness. And that's where things got darker, because instead of running towards safety, she reportedly ran into the woods when someone tried to approach her. By sunrise, she was gone. No clear footprints, no forced entry, no confirmed struggle, just silence. And what investigators discovered next would only deepen the mystery, because the home she left behind showed no obvious signs of how she exited, or why. Her disappearance triggered one of the largest search operations in the area's history, but the results were devastatingly empty. But what investigators didn't realize yet was that this was not going to be a simple missing persons case. It was the beginning of a 20-year investigation filled with broken timelines, hidden evidence, and unanswered questions. And this is where everything began. The night Asha Degree walked into darkness and never came back. That same morning, what began as a missing child report quickly turned into a full-scale criminal investigation that shocked Cleveland County, because something about Asha Degree's disappearance felt deeply unnatural from the start. Search teams spread across roads, woods, and abandoned areas, but there was no sign of forced entry at her home, no struggle, and no clear exit point. And that is where the mystery began to twist into something darker. Investigators interviewed neighbors, family, and motorists, trying to reconstruct every minute after midnight. But nothing explained why a 9-year-old girl would leave her bed in complete darkness. Then came the first unsettling breakthrough. 2 independent drivers reported seeing a small child walking along Highway 18 in the early morning hours, long after she was supposed to be asleep. But what made this even more disturbing was what they said next. When one driver turned around to check on her, the child reportedly ran straight into the surrounding woods, disappearing into darkness without hesitation. And that's where things got darker, because this behavior did not match a confused child or a simple runaway scenario. Search dogs were brought in immediately, but the trail broke down quickly, as if Asha had simply been lifted out of the environment. Investigators began to suspect she may have met someone on that road, someone who had already been watching. But there were no confirmed suspects, no witnesses stepping forward with clarity, and no physical evidence tying anyone to the scene. Days later, items linked to Asha were discovered near a shed behind a local upholstery shop, raising even more questions than answers. And what happened next changed everything, because the case was no longer about a missing child, but about a possible abduction that left no obvious trace. But the truth was still hidden in the darkness of that road. As the investigation deepened, authorities shifted from searching nearby woods to analyzing every possible connection Asha Degree might have had in the days leading up to her disappearance, but nothing indicated she planned to leave home. Her family described a normal, loving child with no history of running away, which made the Highway 18 sighting even more disturbing in hindsight. But what investigators didn't know yet was that this case would soon develop one of the most puzzling evidence trails in modern missing child investigations. Months passed with no major breakthroughs, and public hope began to fade, until a discovery years later reignited the entire case. In August 2001, over a year after she was last seen, construction workers uncovered a buried backpack at a remote job site. Inside were items connected to Asha's school, including a library book, along with clothing that did not appear to belong to her. And that's where things got darker, because the placement of the backpack suggested intentional concealment, not accident. Investigators immediately re-examined earlier search zones, wondering how such an item could remain undiscovered for so long unless it had been deliberately hidden. This shifted the theory from a possible runaway to a controlled abduction scenario involving time and transport. But there were no fingerprints, no DNA matches, and no confirmed suspect tied to the backpack. Each discovery only widened the mystery instead of solving it. The family, meanwhile, endured years of emotional collapse, holding on to fragments of hope that slowly turned into pain. And this is where the case took a turn, because authorities began considering a single chilling possibility. Asha may not have left that road alone, but no one yet knew who was with her. With the discovery of the backpack, investigators expanded their focus beyond local search zones and began examining possible vehicle involvement, because evidence suggested Asha Degree did not remain on foot for long after the Highway 18 sighting. This shifted the entire direction of the case toward abduction. Witness reports were reevaluated, and attention turned toward a dark-colored early 1970s Lincoln Mark IV or Ford Thunderbird seen in the area around the time of her disappearance. And that's where things got darker, because this vehicle had been reported more than once, suggesting it may have circled the area. Authorities believe the driver could be a critical link, someone who may have offered Asha a ride or forced her into the vehicle. But despite extensive investigation, the car was never conclusively identified, and no owner was confirmed. Meanwhile, Asha's family continued living in emotional limbo, trapped between hope and devastation, as years passed without answers. Every new lead created temporary hope, only to collapse under lack of evidence. Investigators pursued multiple theories, including grooming, abduction by a stranger, and even the possibility of someone known to the family, but none could be proven. And what investigators didn't know was that the case would remain frozen for decades, becoming one of the most haunting mysteries in North Carolina history. Then came another twist years later when renewed forensic interest and federal involvement reopened the case files, bringing attention back to the buried backpack and the Highway 18 sighting. But the truth remained buried deeper than the evidence, because every lead still pointed into darkness without a clear face behind it. And that's where everything stalled again. Years passed with no arrests, and the Asha Degree case slowly transformed into a national cold case symbol, representing how quickly a child can seemingly vanish without explanation, even under immediate search efforts. But behind the scenes, investigators never truly stopped working the file. Every few years, new forensic technology reopened old evidence, but nothing produced a definitive match. The backpack items were re-examined, the Highway 18 timeline was reconstructed repeatedly, and witness statements were compared against evolving databases. But what made this case even more disturbing was the consistency of one detail. Asha was seen walking with purpose, not confusion. And that raised a terrifying question investigators still cannot fully answer today. Was she meeting someone she trusted or someone she feared? And that's where things got darker, because attention shifted toward the possibility of grooming or long-term manipulation before her disappearance. Investigators quietly explored whether someone had been communicating with her prior to that night, but no confirmed evidence was ever released. Meanwhile, the community remained haunted by the idea that a child walked into darkness voluntarily or under influence, only to never return. Then in later years, renewed interest from federal agencies brought the case back into active review, especially after similar cold cases across the country were solved using advanced DNA and digital reconstruction methods. But even with modern tools, Asha Degree's case remained unsolved, and every attempt to close the gap only widened the mystery further. And this is where the investigation took another turn, because authorities began focusing again on the vehicle of interest, suggesting someone may have been watching that road longer than anyone realized. But no one could yet prove who. The breakthrough many had waited for never came easily, but in recent years, renewed FBI attention brought the Asha Degree case back into active field investigation, reigniting hope that long-hidden answers might finally surface. Teams revisited old locations, interviewed previously overlooked witnesses, and reanalyzed vehicle sightings tied to that early morning. And that's where things got darker, because investigators confirmed a specific vehicle pattern that continued appearing in statements. An early 1970s Lincoln Continental or Ford Thunderbird, seen near Highway 18 during the critical time window. This was no longer just a vague description. It became a central investigative focus, suggesting that someone in that vehicle may have interacted with Asha twice that night. But what happened during those encounters remains unknown. Search operations in Cleveland County intensified again, with large-scale property searches and forensic recovery efforts. Ground-penetrating tools and cadaver dogs were deployed, signaling that authorities were no longer treating this as a simple missing persons case. And then came a shocking development. A vehicle matching the description was reportedly removed from a search site, sparking nationwide attention. But officials remained silent on what was found inside, and that silence only deepened suspicion. But what investigators didn't reveal changed everything emotionally for the public, because even after all this time, no human remains were recovered during the search operations. That meant one terrifying possibility still stood. Asha Degree's location remains completely unknown. And that's where the case took another turn, because absence of remains does not mean absence of crime, only absence of closure. And the truth was still somewhere hidden in the evidence. As the investigation continued into 2024, the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office confirmed that renewed search warrants executed on a property in Shelby were directly connected to the Asha Degree case, marking one of the most significant developments in decades. And that's where things got darker, because this was not routine follow-up work anymore. This was targeted excavation based on new intelligence, suggesting investigators believed something critical had been hidden on that property for years. Dozens of agents, forensic teams, and search specialists combed through land using advanced scanning equipment, while cadaver dogs were deployed across multiple zones. The scale of the search suggested investigators were chasing a very specific lead. But what they found, or didn't find, immediately created tension across the community. Officials confirmed the removal of multiple items of interest, but refused to disclose details, fueling speculation and fear that the breakthrough might finally be close. And this is where the case took a turn, because for the first time in years, investigators were no longer saying they had nothing. They were saying they had evidence that required analysis. Meanwhile, attention returned again to the original Highway 18 timeline, with analysts reconstructing every known movement minute by minute. The same haunting question returned. Why was a child walking alone at that hour? But despite renewed energy, no suspect was publicly charged, and no official conclusion was announced. The mystery remained open, suspended between evidence and silence. And what happened next changed everything, because even after major searches, the central question remained unanswered. Where is Asha Degree? And who was with her that night? After the high-profile 2024 searches, public attention surged again toward the Asha Degree case, with many believing a breakthrough was finally imminent, especially after officials confirmed connections between seized items and the long-standing investigation. But weeks passed, and no definitive announcement followed. And that's where things got darker, because silence in a case like this often means investigators are carefully building something much larger behind the scenes. The removal of evidence suggested forensic testing was underway, possibly linking multiple decades of investigative work. Meanwhile, independent analysts and former investigators revisited the case publicly, pointing to the same unresolved contradictions: no clear motive, no confirmed abduction point, and no definitive timeline after the Highway 18 sighting. But what investigators didn't know at the time of early searches was that even the smallest overlooked detail could redefine the entire case narrative. And this is where the case took a turn, because attention shifted again toward behavioral interpretation. Why would a 9-year-old leave home voluntarily in darkness? Was she scared? Was she meeting someone? Or was she led? Each theory created more questions than answers, and every attempt to narrow the suspect pool only expanded it. The emotional toll on the family also resurfaced publicly, with years of unanswered grief turning into a permanent search for truth. The idea that a child walked into darkness and never returned continued to haunt every new development. But despite renewed scrutiny, no arrest was made and no suspect officially named. The case remained locked in investigative limbo, and that's where everything paused again, waiting for the evidence to finally speak. With no official resolution after decades, the Asha Degree investigation became one of the most persistent cold cases in American history, studied by both federal and local agencies trying to identify what critical detail had been missed since 2000. And that's where things got darker, because every new review of the file seemed to circle back to the same point. Highway 18, the early morning hours, and the unidentified vehicle. Investigators repeatedly emphasized that the timeline after 3:30 a.m. remains the most crucial window in the entire case. Yet it is also the least understood. Witnesses saw her, but no one saw what happened immediately after. And what investigators did not expect was how many conflicting theories would emerge from such a small set of facts. Each theory created a different version of events, but none could be proven beyond doubt. Then came renewed forensic interest, suggesting that even trace evidence from the backpack or recovered items could still yield answers with modern testing. But despite reanalysis, no public breakthrough was confirmed. And this is where the case took a turn, because investigators quietly acknowledged that time itself had become the biggest obstacle. Evidence degraded, memories faded, and leads disappeared into history. Yet the vehicle description remained one of the only consistent threads tying witnesses together, suggesting a connection that has never been fully explained. But even that thread was not enough to identify a suspect, and the mystery remained open, deeper than ever. Today, the Asha Degree case remains officially unsolved, but far from forgotten, as investigators continue to treat it as an active missing child and possible homicide investigation, with periodic updates and renewed forensic reviews. And that's where things got darker, because the passage of time has not weakened the central mystery, it has intensified it. Every year without answers adds weight to the possibility that someone has carried this secret for decades. Authorities continue to emphasize the importance of the vehicle of interest and the Highway 18 sightings, but no individual has ever been publicly charged in connection with her disappearance. And what makes this case even more haunting is the contrast between normal life and sudden loss. One night, Asha Degree was a child at home with her family, and hours later, she was seen walking alone in darkness, never to be seen again. And this is where the case took a final turn, because despite massive searches, federal involvement, and renewed 2024 operations, no confirmed resolution has been reached. The backpack, the sightings, the vehicle, and the search warrants all form fragments of a puzzle that still has no completed picture. But investigators continue working, because even now, every new technology offers a chance that one overlooked detail could finally expose the truth. Until then, the case remains suspended between hope and silence. And the final question still echoes through every report, every search, and every theory. What really happened to Asha Degree that night on Highway 18? And who, after all these years, still holds the answer?